Hello and welcome to the podcast. Today, guys, I had the distinct pleasure of sitting down with Rett Larson. Rett has had an interesting path coming from the United States over to building a company called JUZPLAY over in China. He's had the privilege of working with Velocity Sports, Athletes Performance, and now Exos. And that whole run has brought him to amazingly high-level athletes here in the States and has brought him behind the curtain working with the Chinese system. So we start out and we talk about his professional voyage coming from Richmond, Virginia, literally across the street from the university, and heading all the way over to China. You know, we talk about some of his work that he's done with the defending World Cup Volleyball champions, which is really cool. You know, the opportunity to work with a world champion is absolutely fascinating, and the whole deal that he has with the volleyball team now prepping for Rio is really, really super cool. And then we get into talking about his time with the Chinese divers, who are obviously immensely successful on the Olympic and world stage. And he talks about how dealing with the Chinese athletic system and the sport system has really altered his thoughts on early specialization, because that's what they do in China. And these individual sports where they're very skill oriented, they have a very high level of success at. He then gets into his latest project, which is JUZPLAY, and it's really neat. The whole thing, I think, is super cool, and their vision and what they're doing, let alone the facilities they're building, I think it's just really, really awesome. And then he talks about a really cool story about positive reinforcement and how that affected his drive to be a coach and how it impacts the athletes that he handles every day. You know, and looking at it, going to China, there's not a lot of people in the system that are, you know, all sunshine and rainbows. It's just kind of like, however it is, this is how it is. And Rett gets into talking about how picking people up, especially in their system, leads to some really significant improvements. Guys, this is an awesome talk. Rett is, beyond everything else, one of the best people there is in performance. So I hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Let's get right to it. Rett, thanks for being with us today, man.
Hey, my pleasure, of course.
And, an interesting story and an interesting topic, because we're going to be able to look behind the curtain of what goes on over in China. So let's first talk about how you got over there. What was your voyage to China?
Yeah, well, I kind of am in a special situation. Well, I know it was 4 years ago when I first went over, and that is that I'd been training elite and Olympic athletes in the United States for a handful of years, and I'd been in the business long enough. And I had made enough connections with other people in the industry that when Athletes Performance, now Exos, when they won a bid to work with the Chinese Olympic teams to prepare them for the London Olympics, I had a couple of really good friends there that looked for me to come over and lead a team. And what they liked about me is that not only did I have the experience they wanted, but the Chinese had made no uncertainty about the fact that they wanted a male, to be over there in charge of things, because it's a super misogynistic society still. It's also a society that really respects maturity. So the fact that I was pushing 40 years old really helped. And then when you're looking for someone with experience training elite athletes, as well as being 40, as well as not having a wife and kids who could just pick up and move to China for a year, there's not that many folks out there. So I kind of got lucky that I kind of checked a bunch of the demographic boxes that the Chinese Olympic Committee was looking for. And it also so happened that I was with Velocity Sports Performance for 12 years. And I'd kind of gotten to a point in that company that I think I'd just gotten complacent. And I needed an adventure. Living in Southern California, one of these lives where it's just all, you wake up every day and it smells like suntan lotion and the beaches there. It leads a cushy life. And I don't know that that made me a very good person. So I kind of relished at the opportunity to go over and get a little bit more stimulus over in China and take the plunge for what I thought was just going to be 1 year working with the athletes for London, but then what turned into, well, now 4 years plus.
So fast forward now to 2016, heading into Rio. One of the teams that you're responsible for is the defending world champion volleyball squad.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that journey. Coming back over and winning kind of a minor championship.
Well,
Um,
it's funny that I'm like 99% of your listeners is going to think, World Cup, women's volleyball. That's nice. That must be nice for them. But China wins so much stuff. But that's not the case. It's true China wins a lot of stuff. And before the London Olympics, my team and I were fortunate enough to work with a bunch of what China calls their gold medal factories. And China, back in the 80s when they decided to start caring about the Olympics, they went after it really, really strategically, where they decided they would pour all of their money and resources into just individual sports where they could potentially, they could pour money into things like gymnastics or diving. And if it does well, you get like 8, 10, 12 gold medals out of a team. Whereas if you pour all your money into the men's basketball program, if everything goes perfectly well, you get 1 gold medal out of it. Well, China doesn't want 1 medal when they can pour the same amount of money into a smaller team, or maybe a team a sport that the West doesn't care about, or women instead of men that in the rest of the world aren't getting as much money. Then it's a numbers game. China just wants to win gold medals. So it was really interesting to see how much they pay attention to the individual sports at the expense of team sports, which frankly, culturally in China, don't really work well anyway. This one-child policy and, going into sports schools when you're a little kid, it drives a lot of that teamwork passion out of you, that passion for sport that is more necessary in a team sport than it is in just a rote muscle memory. Well, not muscle, that's a bad term, but rote, like technical perfection kind of sport like gymnastics or diving. Well, now, as opposed to those sports that we worked with in London and a little bit since, I've gotten to start working with the women's volleyball team, which is in China's history the only team sport that they've had any success in. They won a gold medal in the 80s, and they haven't won anything in any team sport, men or women, in 12 years until we won the World Cup. And so for that reason, China has sunk a bunch of resources. There's a bunch of stress and pressure on the Chinese women's volleyball team to be China's golden team. Their team that can finally beat the Western countries in the sports they profess to love the most.
That's pretty amazing. And it's a model where they really look at the West with that team too, isn't it?
Absolutely. We get really, it's also a unique kind of awesome perfect storm of greatness on this volleyball team, because what I haven't mentioned yet is the head coach of that team was actually the head coach of the women's team for the USA going into the London Olympics. So our head coach is a national icon in China, even before she just won the World Cup. She was their superstar MVP of the 84 Olympics, I think, 84 Olympics. And she just complete rock star. She then became a great coach who went and took the USA in London to a surprise silver medal. Then comes back to China as China's great hope for taking their team that did nothing in London and trying to get them back to greatness. We were underdogs for a while, and then all of a sudden we got really lucky in Japan last fall to upset a couple of really great teams and eke out a win at the World Cup. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that the USA beat us up in that World Cup, but we got lucky and we beat a couple of teams that the USA ended up losing to. So we kind of snatched that one out from under their grasp, luckily enough, and got a quick qualifier to the Olympics. And so now we're in a good position, but we also don't like to have that target on our backs. I think China plays best as an underdog.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's interesting too, because most people do think when they think of China, they think automatically it's like ping pong, they
Yeah,
think diving, they think gymnastics. Well, you've had the luck to and the privilege of working with one of them. So
right.
let's talk a little bit about your time with the divers and how that
Yeah.
whole process works.
Yeah, yeah, and let me say right off the bat that I want to give credit where credit's due. I was part of a team over there. When I say I worked with diving, I was one of like 3 or 4 coaches that got to work with the diving team while we were there. Athletes Performance, now Exos, does a great job of making sure everyone's really fully integrated. All coaches are helping each other out. So that caveat aside, kind of one of the great things about China diving, as well as almost all of those individual sports, that every coach, I'm almost sure every coach that goes to China, probably one of their biggest aha um, revelations over there is that technical training, enormous volumes of technical training, works. That the Chinese have succeeded in these sports despite having strength and conditioning practices that would make your middle school PE teacher's eyes roll. Like, it is painful to watch and surprising to watch athletes at the highest level in China, sitting around a Nautilus machine that could have been lifted from a Ramada Inn and doing 30 seconds of everyone the same weight on 17 different exercises while they just churn through. And these are gold medalist badminton, gold medalist ping pong that have just never been taught how to do weightlifting like we take completely for granted here in the United States. Now, note that 2 buildings over is one of probably the best Olympic weightlifting program on planet Earth in the Chinese Olympic lifters, who have just decided to never tell any of those amazing secrets for developing power and strength to any other sport. Because if you were to watch all the other Chinese sports do Olympic lifts, it's like they just watched a YouTube video of it and they're just trying their best to mimic it when 4 gold medalists are 2 buildings over. But so what we quickly learned, to kind of put a cap on a long answer, is that the Chinese, especially with these individual sports, have succeeded because they have been doing the same thing for so long. That these Chinese sports schools that they've grown up in, when it comes to just getting 10,000 hours of a skill to be incredible at it, it's hard to beat that if you can keep them healthy. And our PTs and strength coaches would get together and say, I came over here thinking, all right, I'm going to get these girls deadlifting for the first time. They're going to get super strong. I'm going to increase their vertical jumps. And you almost have to take a backseat and say, hey, maybe my primary objective is not to make the diving team that has already won 85% of the medals they've ever tried to get in the sport. Like, maybe I don't try to take them from 85% to 95 or 100%, but let's just keep them able. Let's not try to get their vertical jump, I should say. Let's not try to get their vertical jump higher. Let's just try to keep them able to withstand that many dives every day of practice, that they're doing 40% more dives than the rest of the teams on the planet, and they're doing it 6 days a week, and they've done it all their lives. I got to make a body that can withstand that kind of torture.
Yeah, and it's the torture not just from into the water, but the torture of walking up to the high dive.
Oh yeah, you remember that story we talked about, right?
Yeah.
So when we first went to do our initial testing on that, of course we put them through like an FMS, and after the movement screen, we kept seeing a ton of knee pain. We're like, what the hell's going on? Why does diving have knee pain? They jump off the springiest thing in the world. Even their dry land training is done on super foamy mats and stuff like that. It's trampolines. Like, how are knees hurting? Like, they get to land head first. It shouldn't be anything until you go to practice and you see that they got to climb up a 75 rung ladder, 100 times a day. They're climbing on a ladder to the top of the Empire State Building every day. No wonder. I'm surprised that all their knees haven't exploded by now. So as a strength coach, I have to not worry about making them jump a centimeter higher off of the 10-meter platform, but I got to worry more about making them better at climbing a ladder so their knees don't swell up after a day of diving.
Yeah, and that's crazy because you look at this and it's because of the early specialization, they're very successful. But
Right.
because of the early specialization, they have these dramatic overuse injuries.
Right.
And because they don't know, well, they don't share information very well with each other, they're not able to do the performance training at a young age. So now, where you could be specializing to a greater extent, you're now in a role where you're really protective and trying to build resiliency that unfortunately, because they didn't share this when they were 12, 13,
Yeah.
14, you have to
You,
catch up on.
Jay, you hit the nail on the head on that. Like, it, it is, so much of my brain has been rewired towards fortification and building that in athletes and away from just pure performance training. And that's to be expected once you get into higher and elite athletes. But I'm doing it at a much like with the volleyball team now and with diving. It was one of the first things we do is take their 15-minute warm-ups and try to turn them into 45-minute movement preparation sessions that I try to bake as much fun fortification, like stimulating, novel, like movement puzzles, things like that I can put on these athletes so that I can start putting a suit of armor on them like right away. And I know that I'm probably the only person being interviewed for a strength and conditioning podcast this month who's going to say that early specialization works. I am going to ruffle so many feathers. But it's true that if you care about these technical sports, that if I do my job correctly and I can get these athletes when they're 7, 8, 10 years old, and I can teach them how to be more robust, or I can make them more robust by teaching them things that will fortify their body. And I can do it in a fun and stimulating environment and maybe avoid some of the burnout that makes these athletes hate diving potentially by the time they're gold medalists. It is tough to beat a diver that's been doing these dives that often since they were a little kid. Not only physically, but the mental toughness of doing something for so long that it no longer has the emotional impact that it does for Western divers. I guarantee the Chinese divers get up on a 10-meter board, with the gold medal on the line, and their heart rate's sitting at like 85 beats a minute. And they're just thinking about just doing this dive like they've done a billion times with competition, way worse than they ever get at the Olympics, and nailing it. And that's robotic. And very famously before the London Olympics, Tom Daley, who's the UK's great white hope for diving, he said it is really hard to beat his Chinese rival Chu Bo. It's really hard to beat Chu Bo. He's a robot. I mean, he's gotten more perfect tens than anyone ever has. He's just a diving robot. He doesn't have interests outside of blah, 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 outside of diving. Well, Chu Bo would say, yeah, of course I'm a robot. Like I used to love diving, but now it's just my job. Right. And honestly, we talk a lot about making athletes technically better, that we want to get them to a place of unconscious competence, where they do exactly the right movement patterns without having to think about it, without it being volitional. Well, that's a robot. A robot is unconsciously competent. And so you get a degree of technique, perfection, and mental toughness with early specialization that it is hard to catch up to in technical sports if you're not doing it. And I know that's unpopular, but we're watching it, and now that they're bringing over Western strength coaches and, more importantly, like physios and physical therapists that can keep those athletes healthy, and bring over kind of a more positive. At least our group is committed to being extremely positive and making athletes love the experience that they're with when they're with us foreign coaches. And China could be tough to beat because you're not going to be able to. You in the United States, you're not going to be able to mimic the hours without getting busted for child labor violations.
Yeah, I mean they got to go to school, right?
Yeah, the U.S. people do. I have in 4 years of working with Olympic athletes that are all between, 12 and 20 something. Have had dozens of 12 to 18-year olds. I have never had one of them tell me they had to miss a training session for school.
Whoa.
Yeah, most of them just are going to school 2 mornings a week. Some of them, by the way, some of them are brilliant and can go to college, but the lion's share of them are, they're in sports schools. Their classes are about layups and free throws.
That's pretty neat. And I think that I mean, yeah, there's going to be a lot of people that are like, oh, the specialization. And it's, because you see all the posts on social media all the time about
Yeah,
how, oh, well, this team has so many multi sport athletes from high school and blah, blah,
right,
blah. But you almost look at it like the burnout type idea that you could almost say like broke them down
right.
mentally as what has made like them walking up on the board. All right, it's winning time. It's time to win the gold medal. Oh, ho hum.
Yeah,
Here I go.
a complete lack of anxiety is a
Yeah.
pretty potent tool
Oh,
in an elite athlete's toolbox. Um, you in a team sport, you take that to a team sport, and a complete lack of anxiety is also a complete apathy, which is never. That's somebody that can't be roused by a halftime speech. Also, that's somebody who can't fire their team up to work together better as a unit. And this is why what is great for a couple of sports is not led to any success in China in things like basketball and soccer, which are China's two favorite sports. It's ironic to have a country that loves. I've watched more NBA games in China than I ever did when I lived in the United States. That they love sports that they're just garbage at.
well, they've had a couple of good women's soccer teams
Yeah,
that played for World Cup finals, but yeah,
yeah,
it is. I mean, if when you're that broken down or beaten down or I don't know what other word I would use, it would be very hard in a team setting because eventually somebody's got to jump up and be like, "Yo, let's go."
right,
But when the
right.
emotion's been sucked out of you, yeah,
And
I mean, it's time to go freaking hit a perfect 10 to win a gold medal. You're
yeah,
relaxed, you're just going to smoke it.
exactly. Just go, just clock in, do my job, clock out. But but China, it's easier for China to get. Well, I don't know if it's easier, but China is willing now to make changes. Like China's learning from the West in a way that I don't know that the West is learning from China. I mean, if you are a soccer coach in Europe, or even to some extent in the United States, and you want to make a ton of money in the next 5 years, go get a job in China because China is ready to pour money into make our soccer teams more like European soccer teams. Put us in the next World Cup for soccer. Put us on the world stage for basketball because they're determined to change that, and they're hiring Western. I mean, every basketball coach for the national team is foreign. They know what they lack, and knowing what your weaknesses are is also pretty important.
Oh, yeah. And it's going to bring in a new culture and new ideas and new views that are going to
Right.
carry into that. But talking about that burnout and keeping things fun, you're in a new interesting program as well.
Oh yeah, right. With um, the company that I work for now is JUZPLAY, and one of the reasons that I joined and kind of helped to start this company is that I'm pretty committed to the idea of, I guess, compliance. That maybe instead, I think we spend a lot of time debating the X's and O's of a program, and whether or not we need to do a ton of readiness profiling, whether or not we need to do a lot of jump testing, or maybe velocity-based training is the best, or what are your favorite exercises and there's a lot of lip service paid to this, but maybe not a lot of people are concentrating on maybe the most important thing, which is let's develop a program that people really, really love doing and really get behind. Not necessarily, and this is an abstract concept to communist China where no one, if you have a good strength program, it could be utter torture. If it works, we're doing it. But I want to find a happy medium there. I think that we can design programming that is also based on giving the athletes enough autonomy, which they haven't had in the past, to make them buy into a program and really, really get more benefit out of this program because they fully understand how it's helping them and they know it's designed with their best interests at heart. I mean, and this is sometimes hard for me to push through head coaches, but we will let athletes make decisions on things that previously they never could. If an athlete is having a bad day, they're allowed to come to me and I give them a pass. If athletes, after a month of training, if an athlete says, and I will proactively go to the athletes and give them a little questionnaire and say, hey, out of all the exercises we're doing, which is, I'll pick my 14 favorite exercises that they're absolutely going to do every week. And I'll say, out of my 14 favorites, which one of these, are there any of these that you just hate, that you dread every day that we have to do Turkish get-ups because it just doesn't feel good, you don't think it really works, blah, blah, blah. And if they say, yeah, I can't stand Turkish get-ups, then I'll take out Turkish get-ups. I want them, it's more important to me that they feel that we are a team working together. That, of course, I'm the boss of the weight room, and there's a lot of things that they're going to do regardless. But if there's something that someone really doesn't like, I'm more interested in developing a stronger bond with that person by giving them one of the 20 alternatives to a Turkish get-up that can do similar things than I am about forcing something they hate down their throat and making them do it. But I'll do that even daily. I'll even tell the girls, if we're going to do like a rep scheme that is, theoretically I'd want to be a little bit of ascending reps than descending, I'll give maybe the option to say, oh, you can do it descending, ascending. Whatever you want to do that day. But, here's what the rep schemes will look like. Do whatever you like. And so it's that kind of buy-in that I like. I spend a lot of my day thinking about how I can take an exercise that the girls, are now sleepwalking through, or maybe they don't enjoy, and trying to find ways to make it stimulating and interesting and make them like it.
That's interesting, especially for that culture where they're so used to being like, you are at point A at this time for this long, and you are going to do this many of that and the other thing.
Right. If I can mobilize, if I can like warm a hip up by having them do hula hoop relays, I'm going to do that instead of just the same hip exercise I've been doing for a long time. If I can do agility through throwing a frisbee around, I'm going to do that instead of the same ladder drills that have been done since the beginning of strength and conditioning. If there's no shortage of ways that we can create kind of fun but maybe self-policing exercises that instead of traditional balance exercises, we throw balance beams all over the place. We make the girls do gymnastics and silly things that are also serving a purpose. Not just because they're silly, but because I want to sneak in as much kind of movement, I've said this before, but like movement puzzles in as I can that allow their bodies to figure out new ways to move. And for a lot of them who have these little aches and pains, motion is lotion. That just getting them moving in new patterns and making them have to giggle while they figure out how to do something is wonderful.
Oh, I bet. And it's with Just Play, it doesn't just stay at them. This is now expanding to kids and all over the place.
And that's where we want to go ultimately with this. Can I tell a quick story? So
Sure.
when I was a little kid living in Richmond, go Spiders, I grew up as a cross country runner, and I was this tall, which is like 6'2", and I weighed 135. I was thin. When I ran in college, my college cross country coach told me that he could take my pulse just by looking at my rib cage because you could see my heart beating through it because that's so little body fat. Anyway, I'm like a teeny kid. And the summer between middle school and high school, the high school cross country coach says, Rhett, I'm super excited about you coming onto the team. I really need you to bulk up a little bit. You need to start eating Joe Weider's weight gainer powder, and here are the keys to the varsity weight room. So I am a maniac in the weight room that summer. I am lifting every day, unguided, but I'm just walking around the Nautilus machine, just doing sets and sets of curls and staring at myself in the mirror. And at the end of that summer of getting diesel, I went from like 135 to like 138. Like I gained like 3 pounds of muscle. But I strode into my community pool where I used to swim, where I used to do swim team. And I didn't do swim team that summer because I was so committed to getting swole. And I rolled in, and from across the pool, I see Coach Tamra. Now, Coach Tamra was that like college kid from the University of Virginia who came back every summer to just coach the swim team. She was gorgeous, 20 years old, like totally accelerated my puberty. Just anyway, she was awesome. And I see her from across the pool, and she walks towards me, and we get, like 10 feet from each other, and she goes, "Oh my God, Rett, you are so much bigger now. Have you been lifting weights?" And that's not like kind of what she said, Jay. That's exactly what she said.
That's awesome, man.
With all the pauses the exact same. I remember everything about that moment. I remember what she was wearing. I remember what I was wearing. I remember what song was playing on the speakers in the pool, which was she blinded me with science. Like, I remember everything about it because it was incredibly impactful that a coach that I respected and I cared about acknowledged my hard work and said exactly the right thing to me at the exact right time. You could argue that compliment that she gave me might be the reason that I got into strength and conditioning. That telling a kid who needs to hear it that what they're doing is working, or that they're good enough to do this, that they can get better, is incredibly impactful. And for that reason, as much as I love training elite athletes, I've always had this passion for working with younger athletes, because it's those Disney moments, those Disney movie moments that are the ones that I think I'll remember forever. I mean, the World Cup was pretty freaking cool, but no, like I mean, that's the reason I stayed at Velocity Sports Performance for 12 years. Is because you get addicted to making that kind of an influence on kids that go on to not only become stronger, faster, and maybe make a varsity team, but become better human beings. And I think you miss an opportunity as a coach if you're not, especially a coach of young athletes, if you're not also keeping an eye to teaching some really essential virtues that make athletes better people. And I've seen, I've been blessed to work with a bunch of outstanding youth coaches, and I pick up so many incredible tips and tricks for how to keep kids from being forced into a situation where they're going to lie to you because they feel so much peer pressure to have come in not last in an exercise. There's a lot of ways that really great youth coaches, applaud this effort and not achievement. And, the guys doing it right are really fun to watch. And that's been inspiring to me. And that's kind of my big plan, is that I would love to be someone that takes my methods of training the elite athletes in China and uses that power that I could kind of have over there to maybe start influencing the way that the Chinese train young athletes and young kids in general. That if we can kind of make these sports schools a little bit better place to grow up, that could be pretty impactful as well. Yeah,
no doubt about it. And just to have a moment like that with one of those kids over there, I mean,
yeah,
their face might melt. I mean, like, he said something nice.
Yeah,
like, doesn't happen all the time.
Mm-mm.
And even more so there than here. I mean,
right. I mean, because we go over there, and when I hire coaches to come over to China, one of the things I say is that we could very easily be the most positive coach they've ever had. They don't associate coaches with being, he was a really positive or negative coach. They just know he was a successful coach or a not successful coach that they either liked or disliked. But there's no expectation that a coach of a team in China needs to be nice or caring or positive. Their super famous tennis star, Li Na, who's actually won Li Na is the best tennis player of all time in China. She's won 2 Grand Slams. And Li Na wrote an autobiography where she said, in 9 years of being a junior tennis player in China, I never heard one word of encouragement from my coach, or her mother for that reason. I was always told that I was too slow, too fat, too ugly, too weak to ever be a good tennis player. It wasn't until she got a Western coach, she got a German coach who was like, she's like, I never knew how much better I could play when I actually had the confidence of someone telling me that I was good. Well, I want to be that coach. I want the coaches under me to be those coaches. And we take that role really seriously.
That's fantastic. And that, spending a month over there, I could see how, like, when you give the time to the kids and you are investing in them, and it's more than just, you know,
Right.
they quick. I mean, they click and they get going quick, and it was a real eye opening experience for me, and it's really awesome to hear that's the direction you guys are going.
Yeah. You know, there are no shortage of stories. I've told you, I think, before that we had, on the gymnastics team, which is filled with young, adorable, hard-working girls and boys. And on that gymnastics team, there are girls on that team that have been away from their parents so long. Because, of course, if you can just do the splits as a 2-year-old and can do a great tumble, you might be taken into a sports school because they peak so early to be a great gymnast. That those girls have been away from their parents for so long that when they call them on weekends, they have trouble understanding their mom and dad's accents. That they have been in the sports school system or taken to Beijing to be in the Olympic training program. And I know from like Western ears that sounds horrible. It sounds like child torture. But you also have to realize that they're coming from a place where they don't know any better. And they're also going from from single child families where they have no brothers and sisters to going into kind of a family-like unit. One of the things that China does a great job is putting these girls on teams and making them into a family. They all call each other big sister, big brother, little brother on teams. There's research that shows that young athletes, that like the second child in any family is the most likely to be great in sports because, being that middle child, especially with a bunch of older brothers and sisters, you have to compete against them. And that's to an extent traumatic. And, there's a body of research that talent breeds trauma. And so when you're a young athlete, in China, you don't have a brother or sister, but when you get thrown onto a sports team with kids 2 and 3 years older than you that are beating you in your sport every day, that can be the trauma that turns you into a superstar.
Yeah,
I mean,
that's really. I mean, it is crazy to people because they don't understand. Well, A, the in depth of the specialization, and B, how the culture affects all of it. Um, but it's really neat that they do have that sociological instinct to just become a
yeah,
family.
they look at and at the Olympic level, they look out for each other. I mean, it's imagine the impact. I mean, imagine if you just wanted to be like a filmmaker. Imagine if you got to, as a 18-year-old, go and watch Steven Spielberg make 2 movies. Just sit with him every single day. That would be more valuable to you than 30 years of film school. Well, these young athletes, the junior diving team gets to spend almost every waking hour with Wu Mingxia, and who has won 6 gold medals, 5 gold medals in 3 different Olympics, with Chu Bo, who can't stop winning gold medals in world championships. And so they get to mimic all of the training, all the training they're doing, but also the way they eat, the way they sleep, the discipline, everything about that. And they're getting to see that when they're 6 years old and live among it. It's hard to beat that kind of a mentorship that's happening at all levels of that process.
That's awesome, though.
Yeah, yeah, and when you think of like, gosh, I don't want to say the cruelty, but when you think of the differences of like the coaching philosophies, and like I said, they don't have to be mean, or they don't have to be nice. As a technical coach in China, they don't know any better. That's the way they were raised. They don't associate sports necessarily with all the fun that we associate it with, and for that reason, you don't see many Chinese people that are like, oh, I would give anything to be blank Chinese athlete, because that's not associated with being an amazing life as it is in the United States. Oh my God, you get to play basketball for a living? Oh, I'd give anything to be LeBron James. No, they know that it is a hard road as well. And the Chinese athletes that are getting their childhood a little bit taken away from them and are working crazy around the clock, are suffering all kinds of, have the bodies of broken 50-year-olds when they're 14. they also know that the alternative for a Chinese kid growing up, in a village in China isn't awesome.
Yeah.
And that it might stink that, coaches in China will hit athletes. A male coach will lay out a female girl. Now, fortunately, that stuff is kind of going away, but I've seen that with my eyes. That you have to realize that's just the way all of them were brought up. They don't know that that's bad, and to some extent, it's a bit. I feel like it might be not drastically far away from if I were to just plot myself in a 1930s football practice in the middle of Oklahoma, like a high school football practice. I'm sure there's a coach slapping a kid in the ear hole and like making him eat a salt tab while he runs them, in 110-degree heat until he drops. We probably think nothing of that back in the day. Well, China is in a state of catching up in a lot of different ways. And they're in an accelerated state of it right now. Their economy, everything, but also the way that they treat athletes, the way that they train athletes. And to their credit, they're trying. They're hiring people like us to come over and help. But it can be traumatic for coaches coming over and seeing that the first time. And I'm always having to kind of give these stories of just know that it's not as malicious as you might think it is. It's just they don't know any better. And we're here to passively show them there's a better way, to catch more bees with honey.
Oh, no doubt. And the fact that you guys are there picking the kids up, making things more enjoyable, giving them sort of, I don't know if the word is a childish outlet, but you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like with something that is also going to directly affect how well they can perform is huge. And I can't say that enough about how impressive that is. And I hope people understand like how big time the things you guys are doing over there, man, because it's really awesome.
Well, and I have to thank you. I mean, I have to thank you and all of the other resources that we're able to get in China. China blocks Facebook and Twitter and YouTube and all these wonderful coaching, all these wonderful things that help us coach. But and we can get VPNs that jump the firewall. But you're certainly, in China, we find ourselves in a little bit of a bubble. And I don't know how many pages of notes I've taken from conversations with you, now that you have your podcast, with all the other great strength and conditioning podcasts out there. It enables me to stay cutting edge and bring these great tools that we're enjoying to the West to China, while I'm also working on some of the lower hanging fruit in the Chinese cornucopia of food.
Yeah. Well, appreciate the kind words, man, and we're really excited for you, brother, and everything that you're doing over there. Keep up the good work, and except maybe if you run into these women that wear red, white, and blue down there in Brazil.
I know. Hey, it's hard for me to get on here and just be also pro-China, because in being pro-China, you have to be a little anti-USA because they're competing for so many of the same medals.
Yeah.
My mom gives me crap for it all the time. I always have to remind her, hey, Mom, it's not like I'm training the Chinese militia. We're still talking about like fun and games here, right?
Yeah, totally. Well, hey, man, I appreciate you taking the time, and we will catch up real soon, brother.
Yeah, and this is my pleasure. I've had so much fun. Let me know if you ever want to do it again.
Definitely will. Definitely will. Thanks, pal. And a huge thanks to today's guest, Rett Larson. Guys, absolutely awesome talk. Someone that's in the middle of Chinese athletic development, giving an inside, view of it, showing us, telling us, talking to us about how they do things with one of the most successful sports they have. It's really fantastic, and I can't thank Rett enough for taking the time out to talk with us about it today. If you guys enjoyed the quick talk as much as I did, please share it through a social media outlet of your choice. If you have any questions, thoughts, if it helped you at all, if this got you guys thinking about anything, fire away. Leave it below here, whether it be on Facebook, YouTube, tweet it at us, shoot it to us on Instagram, whatever it may be. Guys, Rett is open to discussing everything. He shares openly. He is an honest guy. He seriously is one of the best people that I've ever met when it comes to coaching. So if there's anything else you guys want to hear, please let us know. I'm definitely going to have this man back on. He is a wealth of knowledge, coaching at the highest level possible, And like I said, he's just a super dude. I can't thank Rett enough, and I really do appreciate you guys being part of all this. Hopefully, you guys enjoyed this as much as I did. We'll be back next week with another awesome guest. We will see you then.